Let's take you to our top story this hour. That is the corruption case against former President Jacob Zuma and French arms manufacturer Thales. We're on standby to hear at 2 o'clock this afternoon if the High Court in Pietermaritzburg will grant Zuma's application for yet another postponement. The former president wants that postponement while the Supreme Court of Appeal considers his reconsideration application to the head of the Supreme Court of Appeal, which just recently threw out a bid by Zuma to appeal an earlier High Court ruling that dismissed his recusal application against the lead prosecutor, Advocate Billy Downer. Zuma has accused Downer of bias and says, therefore, he is unfit to prosecute him. Let's talk about how we got here. Go back a few years into the arms deal case. We're joined this afternoon by Hennie Van Vuuren, founder of the organization Open Secrets, and has been tracking this case for years, as many have been doing. Hennie, welcome to the program. As I was saying, it's been well over 10 years, almost 20 years now, and the memory of what is said to have happened in the arms deal has either begun to fade, or for many people, it's a completely different story. Let's go back a few years and talk about how we got here.
Yeah, thanks, Tembekile. Indeed, I think this is very much like a telenovela. We have a new episode in the saga, but the longer arc, the longer story is one truly of a great injustice. And the roots of this, of course, were in the infamous arms deal of the late 1990s. 1999, South Africa entered into a deal with a number of European countries to buy weapons, which the country, we would argue, didn't need and certainly couldn't afford at the time. So we spent, in today's rand value, about 140 billion rand. It's about 20,000 rand paid by every South African for these weapons and weapon systems. And one of the contracts, and there were, Tembekile, should I add, corruption right across this deal in many aspects of it, involving these European arms companies and South African politicians, middlemen, business people who have escaped accountability. But of course, a central pillar of this was the deal involving French arms company Thales. They were awarded a contract to provide some of the weapon systems for the frigates, for the warships that were bought at the time. And that was primarily done through a man called Shabir Sheikh. Sheikh was the financial advisor to an aspirant politician from KwaZulu-Natal in the late 1990s by the name of Jacob Zuma. And so the evidence that is presented and the evidence that has been in the public domain for 20 years, Tembekile, really rests on payments that the French arms company Thales was not only made one payment by Shabir Sheikh, for which Sheikh was found guilty in court in 2006 of 1.6 million rand to Jacob Zuma, but most importantly, a promise made by Thales that they would pay Jacob Zuma 500,000 rand a year over a number of years as a kind of a security to ensure that should he rise to power, which he did indeed do as deputy president under Thabo Mbeki, he would work to quash the investigation process against Thales. Basically, it was Thales's way of buying insurance to escape any form of accountability in South Africa.
Let's revisit something linked to that very point that you're making, because one of the refrains in the defense of former President Jacob Zuma has been that at the time of the arms deal, he was not a figure in national government. As you rightfully said, he was working at the time in KwaZulu-Natal politics and government there. How is it then that he was seen allegedly as someone with so much influence?
Yeah, Tembekile, I think it is an important point to consider. Let's recognize firstly, he may not have had the most senior position in national government. He was a very influential leader within the governing party, within the African National Congress, and most certainly KwaZulu-Natal was an important place for him to be deployed, not only because he's from KwaZulu-Natal, but because the peace in South Africa at that point rested on the ability to quell the flames of violence and of what was civil war in KwaZulu-Natal in that period. So any politician like Zuma played very important roles in places like KwaZulu-Natal. It was very clear that he would be tipped for senior position. There was already talk of this. I think it is important to understand as well, Tembekile, the way that the global arms industry operates as a fundamentally, and we can say that with certainty, a corrupt industry. There is a standard practice, and certainly that was the case in the late 1990s, where European arms companies would pay bribes and basically get a tax deduction for paying bribes. And it shows how inherently criminal aspects of the European economy were then and still continue to be now. And so what they do is they bet against the future by identifying strong candidates for future positions in governments, like in South Africa and in other countries, basically make sure that they bring them onto their books by paying them bribes, and then the payback comes when that person gets into office. And so what happened in South Africa with Jacob Zuma is very similar along the playbook that companies like the French arms company Thales have operated across the globe. And it is indeed not just a standard business practice, it's a fundamentally corrupt practice intended to undermine young democracies like South Africa.
Would the prosecution of the former president in Thales, if it eventually ever happens, would that draw a line under the chapter of the arms deal? And I ask that in the context of the Arms Deal Commission of Inquiry, which we know the credibility and the findings thereof have been brought into great question in recent years.
Well, not only called into question, Judge Seriti's commission effectively has a full bench of the South Gauteng High Court basically set aside or effectively said that the findings that the conclusion of that entire commission amounted to a waste of public funds. And it's a great embarrassment to people like Judge Seriti and Judge Musi for bringing the judiciary into disrepute for their actions in the Arms Commission. But it will not be the end of this. It would be an important line under the chapter of Jacob Zuma and Thales' involvement, Thembekile, but there are others. There's British Aerospace, there's middleman Fana Hlongwane, a very powerful player who lives in Hyde Park, I'm told, with his many vehicles and has never been held to account. There's alleged bribes by our current ambassador to Mozambique, General Simpiwe Nyanda, and there's the role of other arms companies, other German arms companies, the Swedish arms company Saab. These are all very powerful players in the global economy, and I think that the point behind this is to see this prosecution go ahead and for President Zuma and Thales to have their day in court. I doubt that they wish that to happen through the Stalingard tactics. And then it is up to Shamila Batoy and her colleagues, Advocate Batoy at the National Prosecuting Authority, to ensure that the other prosecutions follow against BAE, Fana Hlongwane, and a range of other actors who have indicated now, so that the NPA and the judiciary is allowed to act, or certainly the NPA, act without fear or favor and allow these matters to be tested in court before independent judges.
So, Hennie, we've seen multiple postponement applications and other legal issues raised by the Jacob Zuma camp throughout the last decade or so, plus, in fact, more than the last decade or so, right? Thales is the co-accused in this matter. How closely is conviction or vindication for Thales linked to the fate of the former president, especially when you consider how hard he's fighting, especially now around the Downer aspect?
Absolutely. Thales, I think, through Advocate Barry Roux, sit on the sidelines and often have said in court, my lord, we will comply to the judge with the decisions of this court. But I think it is fair to assume that if I were Thales, I could imagine a situation where if Jacob Zuma is going to do, his legal team are effectively going to do all the nasty work of the Stalingrad strategy, implementing it. Thales benefits at every step of the way. It's a very wealthy European arms company that will win from this process. And if the matter is for some reason postponed indefinitely, that's a great win for Thales and in fact for the project led by European countries to sell weapons to countries like South Africa that don't need those weapons. So I think the world is watching, Thales from Paris is watching this very carefully because it could have an impact on its own dealings. And so therefore, this is not the Zuma trial. This is the Thales Zuma trial, Thembekile, as we've often made the point from Open Secrets. And it has global significance. It has local significance for us as a country by holding a former president to account for criminal or alleged criminal conduct. But it has global significance in our ability to hold arms companies, and particularly companies like Thales, deeply implicated in corruption, accountable for the injustice that they have been part of.
Hennie Van Vuuren, thank you so much for being on Daytime Update.